Hello friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. Get ready for heart-touching stories. Don't forget to subscribe and let's begin.
The turkey was still in the oven when my mother told me to leave. I remember the exact moment because I had just set the cranberry sauce on the table. The homemade kind, the kind my grandmother had taught me to make with orange zest and a cinnamon stick, the kind that took 45 minutes and couldn't be rushed. I had driven 3 hours to be there. I had brought wine, flowers, and that cranberry sauce. I had ironed my shirt. "We need to talk to you," my mother said, and the way she said it, clipped, rehearsed, like she'd been practicing in the mirror, told me that whatever was coming had been decided long before I'd walked through the door. My brother Daniel was already sitting at the dining room table with his wife Renee. They weren't looking at me. That was the first sign. Daniel and I had our differences, but he'd always been able to look me in the eye. Now he was studying the centerpiece like it held the secrets of the universe, a little wicker cornucopia that Mom had owned since 1987. My stepfather, Gerald, stood by the fireplace with his arms crossed. Gerald had never liked me. This was not a secret to anyone in the family, including Gerald. He had married my mother when I was 14, and from the first day I had been an inconvenience to him, a reminder of a previous life, a previous man, a previous version of my mother that he wanted erased. "We've decided," my mother said, "that it would be best if you didn't come to family events anymore." Set down the cranberry sauce very carefully, because I was afraid if I didn't concentrate on that single physical act, I would lose my grip on everything else, I said. "It's too much tension," Renee offered, as though she had been waiting for her cue. "Every time you're here there's tension. We just want peace. We want the holidays to be peaceful." I looked at Daniel. He looked at the cornucopia. "What tension?" I asked. "I just got here. I've been here 20 minutes. I made cranberry sauce." "It's not about today," my mother said. "It's a pattern." And then Gerald spoke, because of course Gerald spoke, because Gerald had been waiting 12 years to say exactly this. "You create drama wherever you go. It's exhausting for your mother. We're all exhausted. I want to tell you that I said something powerful and cutting in that moment. I want to tell you that I delivered a speech that made them all reconsider, that Daniel finally looked up from the cornucopia with shame in his eyes, that my mother wavered. But I didn't say anything at all. I picked up my coat from the chair where I draped it, and I walked to the front door and I left. The cranberry sauce stayed on the table. I sat in my car in their driveway for a long time. The house glowed warm and amber through the windows. I could see my mother moving in the kitchen, already returning to her tasks, already folding me out of the afternoon like I was a crease in a tablecloth. I watched Gerald pour himself a drink. I watched Daniel finally look up, but only to check, I think, that I was gone. I was 31 years old. I had a good job, a small apartment I was proud of, a therapist I saw every other Tuesday who had spent the better part of 2 years helping me understand that my family's dysfunction was not my fault. And still, sitting in that car in the gray November afternoon, I felt 14 again. I felt like the kid who ate dinner alone in his room because Gerald preferred the table to be just us. I drove to a gas station down the road and bought a cup of bad coffee and sat in the parking lot because I didn't know where else to go. My apartment was 3 hours away. My friends were all with their own families. I called my friend Marcus and got his voicemail. I called my therapist and got her answering service, which told me in a calm, automated voice that if this was an emergency, I should dial 911. It was not a 911 emergency. It was just my life. I ended up at a diner. It was the kind of diner that stays open every day of the year because someone decided correctly that there would always be people who had nowhere better to be on a holiday. The waitress was a woman in her 60s named Pat. I know because it said so on her name tag. And when I sat down at the counter and ordered coffee and eggs, she looked at me with the particular sympathy of someone who had seen this exact man in this exact condition many times before. "Rough holiday?" she asked. "Getting rougher," I said. She brought me coffee without being asked again and left me alone, which was exactly right. I didn't go back that night. I got a motel room, a sad little roadside place with a heater that clicked and a television that got 6 channels, and I lay on the bed in my ironed shirt staring at the ceiling. I told myself I was fine. I ran the evening back through my mind, looking for the thing I had done wrong, the pattern Gerald had mentioned, the tension Renee had named. I picked at the last few years like a scab. Christmas 2 years ago when I disagreed with Gerald about politics, the birthday dinner where I'd apparently arrived in a mood, the summer barbecue where Renee felt I'd been dismissive of her. I wasn't a perfect person, I knew that. But I also knew with the particular clarity that comes from 2 years of bi-weekly therapy that what had happened tonight was not about cranberry sauce or tension or patterns. It was about Gerald. It had always been about Gerald. My mother had loved him enough to choose him over me, and everyone at that table had been comfortable enough with that choice to sit quietly while she made it. I fell asleep with the television on. My phone woke me at 2:17 in the morning. It was Daniel. I almost didn't answer. I stared at his name on the screen through 2 full rings, remembering the cornucopia, remembering his silence. But something made me pick up, some old reflex of brotherhood that hadn't quite died yet. "You need to come back," he said. His voice was strange, compressed. "Daniel, there's a fire." I drove back in the dark. I smelled it before I saw it, that thick, wrongful smell of a house burning, of wood and insulation and decades of accumulated life turning to smoke. The fire trucks were already there when I turned onto the street, 3 of them, their lights making everything pulse red and white. The neighbors had come out in their coats, standing at a distance with the subdued, horrified posture of people witnessing something they can't look away from. The house was not gone, but the kitchen was destroyed. The back half of the first floor, where the oven was, where the cranberry sauce had been left on the table, where my mother had been preparing Thanksgiving dinner for hours before I arrived, was gutted, black and wet and open to the sky where the roof had buckled. My mother was sitting on the back of an ambulance with a foil blanket around her shoulders. Gerald stood nearby, and for the first time in 12 years, he looked diminished, small. The fire had taken something out of him along with everything else. Daniel met me at the edge of the driveway. "The oven," he said. "We think we left something in the oven after everything. We sat down to eat and nobody checked." Nobody checked. They had sat down to their peaceful Thanksgiving dinner, the one without tension, the one without me, and nobody had thought about the oven. The turkey, or the heat, or a dish towel too close to the burner. The investigators would spend weeks determining the exact cause, but the shape of it was simple. They had been so focused on removing the problem, on removing me, that they had forgotten the ordinary necessary act of checking the oven before they settled in to enjoy their peace. My mother looked up and saw me. I expected something: relief maybe, or guilt, or the complicated gratitude of someone who has been humbled. What I saw instead was just exhaustion. She was 63 years old and her kitchen was gone, and she was sitting on the back of an ambulance on Thanksgiving. I walked over and sat next to her. Neither of us said anything for a long time. The firefighters moved around us with their equipment, businesslike and efficient, and the neighbors eventually drifted back inside, and Gerald went and talked to someone with a clipboard, and Daniel stood at the edge of the driveway looking at what was left of the house. "I'm sorry," my mother finally said. "I know," I said. "I didn't." She stopped, started again. "Gerald thinks..." "Mom," I said, "you don't have to explain Gerald to me. You never had to." She pulled the foil blanket tighter. "Where did you sleep?" "Motel down the road." She nodded. She looked at the house. "I have his mother's china in that kitchen," she said, and I understood that she wasn't talking about Gerald's mother. She was talking about her own mother, my grandmother, the woman who had taught us both to make cranberry sauce with orange zest and a cinnamon stick. "Is it?" The firefighter said the back rooms might be okay. He said we'd know more tomorrow. We sat there together, and I didn't leave. That was the whole of my decision. I simply didn't leave. I could have. It would have been clean and satisfying in the way that revenge fantasies are satisfying, to stand up and say I was thrown out of this house tonight and I have no reason to stay. But I was not a character in a revenge fantasy. I was a person, and these were my people, for better and worse again, and my mother was cold. We got a room at the same motel. Gerald didn't thank me for coming back. I didn't expect him to. In the morning, Daniel and I walked through the house with the fire investigator. The china was safe. Most of the bedrooms were intact, smoke damaged but standing. The kitchen was a total loss. Daniel and I stood in the backyard afterward, not quite looking at each other, the way we hadn't quite been able to look at each other for years. "I shouldn't have let that happen," he said. Earlier, I should have said something." "Yeah," I said, "you should have. I'm saying something now." "I know," I said. "It's late, but I know." That was all. We didn't hug. We didn't have a Hollywood moment in the ruins of our childhood home. But we stood there together in the cold November morning, and that was something. That was the beginning of something, even if I didn't know yet what it would grow into. I stayed for 4 days. Not because anyone asked me to. Gerald certainly didn't, but because my mother needed help filing insurance claims, and because the house needed to be assessed, and because Daniel and Renee were overwhelmed with their kids and their own lives. I made calls. I organized documents. I drove my mother to the insurance office and sat beside her while she explained, in the patient and slightly dazed voice of someone still in shock, what she had lost. On the last day before I drove back to my apartment, my mother hugged me in the driveway for a long time. She didn't say she was sorry again. She didn't explain. She just held on. "Next Thanksgiving," she said when she finally let go. "We'll see," I said. She nodded. She understood that "we'll see" was not a no. I've thought a lot about that night in the years since. I've thought about what it means that the fire started after I left, not because the universe was punishing them, not because karma is some kind of cosmic accountant keeping score. That's not what I believe. I believe the fire started because humans are distracted and ovens are dangerous, and when you spend your emotional energy on an act of cruelty, you sometimes forget the practical tasks that quietly keep your life from burning down. I believe that families are not defined by blood or by holidays or by who has a seat at the table. They are defined by who shows up at 2 in the morning when there are fire trucks in the driveway. They are defined by who stays. My therapist, when I told her the whole story, said something I've carried with me. "You went back not because they deserved it, but because you are the kind of person who goes back. That's yours. Don't let anyone take that from you." She was right. Going back was not forgiveness. It was not absolution for Gerald, not erasure of what my mother chose, not resolution of 12 years of quiet rejection. It was just the truest expression of who I was, someone who makes cranberry sauce from scratch and drives 3 hours, and when called at 2 in the morning, gets in the car. The cranberry sauce was gone, of course, burned with everything else in the kitchen. The but the recipe is still mine. My grandmother gave it to me, and nobody can burn that down. We had Thanksgiving together the following year. It wasn't perfect. Gerald was still Gerald, but my mother cooked and I brought the cranberry sauce, and Daniel's kids ran around the living room making noise, and at some point during the meal, in the middle of all that ordinary chaos, my mother looked across the table at me and smiled. It was enough. For now, it was enough.